Babe, that's not real. That's just all part of it.
It's definitely fake.
Oh my God, it's following.
Matthew Butler-Hart directs and co-writes DAGR, and this is the Welsh spelling of the word dagger, and this is a found footage folk horror movie that takes place in Wales, as you might expect with that title, and it actually has a very similar vibe to one of my favourite found footage movies, that being The Borderlands. Although the story isn't the same, it just has a similar kind of primordial evil, stalking people kind of way vibe to it. Now, the story has two groups of people. I suppose primarily there are a couple of influencers, YouTubers, Gen Zers, who are creating kind of like prank content where they are stealing things and, you know, getting views and things. And they are on the way to pose as caterers in this luxury mansion out in the country where there is a film crew filming some type of commercial, and that's our second group of people, this film crew. And the movie kind of splices in between our two groups of people that are all kind of filming things, and some of it's kind of played in a non-linear fashion, but it kind of makes sense. And we learn that there is this evil force that is at home in this home, and it does focus on a dagger, which was apparently used in some dark rituals back in the ancient Druids era. And this evil force is now affecting and seems to take interest in these people within this house. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let us discuss. So I'd heard good things about this movie. I try not to watch reviews and things really before watching it, but I had heard that this was a good film overall. And let's talk about what I think works in this movie's favour. So let me talk about some technical elements first, and then we'll kind of get into the rest of it. So this is a found footage movie, but I'm going to put an asterisk on this because there is a downside of what I'm about to say. This is a found footage movie that has been edited to be very cinematic, and it kind of almost cheats at being a found footage movie in a way. So the upswing is if you do not like traditional found footage movies because of the kind of the low tech element to it, because of the kind of the running around and all of this sort of stuff, the movie doesn't really feel too much like that. It does have a found footage idea, but for a lot of it they've kind of there's static cameras and they're switching between footage from both parties and kind of intersplicing them, and there's even a kind of a disclaimer at the beginning saying this footage was found and edited by the police, and this is how it is presented, and you know, things like that. They try to kind of get around the fact that obviously, despite this movie having the concept of being a found footage movie, it has been kind of edited and presented more like a traditional style movie in some ways, while still retaining that found footage idea. So you get a polished found footage movie. So those of you who are purists with found footage may find it a little overproduced in that respect, but I think people who maybe have a problem with found footage movies, of which I know there are a few, because you don't like the concept, you don't like the way of the filming style, I think this movie circumvents a lot of those issues because of this sort of more polished and produced manner that it's presenting in it. And the movie, to be fair, in its credit, I think does benefit from it in a way, because some of the kind of the jump scares and the reveals and the build up and the tension is somewhat down to the kind of the way this movie is edited and presented to us, because, you know, we do have this kind of building up of the tension and things. On another technical element, I would say the sound design here is very strong. It almost substitutes for a soundtrack, I will say. But I recommend watching this with a decent sound system if you can, because I don't want to give too much away, but there is the sound effects here that play a kind of a big part. And as I say, in some ways act as a kind of soundtrack in a weird way. And again, it's somewhat produced, you might say, but it's effective. And I think it works for the horror in a way. Now, again, there are downsides to this, which I will come on to. So hold your horses. But I kind of, if you can kind of put your purist hat away about found footage, I think there is a lot to enjoy in the stylings of the way this movie was put together. Now, as I've said, this has a similar vibe to the movie The Borderlands, and that's a film I absolutely adore, because it has a real eerie and sort of dark atmosphere in it, that you do feel there's this creeping dread that's kind of dripping because it's so atmospheric. And that is what I think this movie's biggest strength is that, you know, it's in a way, it's kind of, they're both British movies, they're both kind of found footage films, they're both kind of dealing with ancient kind of powers that are beyond our comprehension and things. So it has that sort of, those elements in common, but also the way that this movie does create atmosphere, I feel. Now, it does take a while to get going, I would suggest. It doesn't really start having any actual kind of horror element until about the halfway mark. But once we do, I think the movie does, you know, does present as a very creepy movie, and you do see possibly more on screen in this one than you maybe do in the Borderlands. But it's again, I think it has this kind of good atmosphere where it has this, it does get across that this is some type of all-powerful entity that's going to be very hard to overcome. And you know, what are you to do, because it's a complete unknown. It's not like you're dealing with a slasher or a vampire where you can broadly know what you're sort of dealing with. Here it's just kind of like there is something and we're not quite sure about what its actual capabilities are and things, which gives it a very sort of scary edge. And they've done some, now this is not an effects heavy movie, but they have used some interesting, and this is going to put you off, but I think it's good, video effects in this movie. When we see, let me just say, an entity, they've kind of made it kind of like jitter around and things, and in an unnatural way, almost like flickering video footage, but everything else is kind of just, you know, static. And it gives it a good effect that there's something otherworldly here. And it's like, it's a good way to have something otherworldly on screen that you're kind of, you know that is, you know, something dark and evil, and it goes with the soundtrack, but it's nothing too over the top in regards to cheesy effects or anything like that. So that was, I think, pretty solid. I actually, although I was a little bit apprehensive about it at first, I actually kind of quite like the way this movie flits between different characters from different parties. We even get a small segment where we see a little bit of video footage from someone else in the house in the 1990s. And it gives it a little bit of variety. I think it just changes it up. It kind of like, it just makes you think of what's going on with these. And I think the movie's quite well put together in that respect. The acting, I think, is fairly solid. One of the actors here actually has the same surname as our director, so I'm wondering if it's his wife or his sister or something. But I gotta say, I think the acting was solid. Again, little asterisks of that, because I do feel there's something that people will say with this, but I think the acting, I personally think the acting was pretty solid. And overall, although it does take a little while to get going, I think once it does, it's a genuinely kind of quite eerie movie, and the sense of tension just builds and builds and builds, and I think once it starts, it never really dissipates. So the second half of the movie is a pretty good, like, adrenaline ride without actually coming into over-the-top set pieces and things like that. So the story was solid. I think it generally has a creepy vibe, and so that's all good stuff. So what can I say that doesn't work in this movie? All right. So now I'm going to backtrack on some of the stuff that I've said. So let's talk about these technical elements, because I do feel this movie kind of cheats. Now, I've compared this movie to the Borderlands. I think the Borderlands had a better way of explaining the found footage, because with this movie, we get this disclaimer saying, oh, you know, this footage has been compiled and edited, but it's been compiled and edited to feel like a movie, not like a police document, if that makes sense. So it kind of feels like, I don't know if the police would be editing this movie to make it feel like building up all this dramatic tension. And, you know, it kind of feels a little bit overproduced, you might say. So I think it does betray the element of being a genuine found footage movie. And it makes me wonder, would this have been better as a traditionally filmed movie? Because I think really it does stretch the kind of the concepts of the found footage technique to, as I say, somewhat implausibility. To add to that, I do think there's, now everyone's here is, you've either got a couple of influencers or a group of filmmakers. They've all got cameras. So we would expect some footage to be captured because of that. But it's it's something like, I feel some of the reasons for filming were convoluted and a little bit hard to believe. So to give you an example, our two influencers basically want to rip these people off, and they want to steal a bunch of stuff. So what they do, then they want to post it online. So as well as having body cams, which I think are fairly obvious, they're holding selfie sticks, and then they're posing as caterers. And that to me would be like, well, surely if you're a caterer, you're not, you know, someone's going to question why you're walking around with a selfie stick. But they also put like static cameras around to capture what they've been doing or are doing. And that's great, but when they kind of inevitably, because they want to try and get like people chasing them, that's the idea here, to have a bit of drama for their channel. But they're going to say, you're placing all these static cameras, and if you're intending to get people chasing after you, because you see a few examples of what they've done before at the beginning of the movie, how are you going to pick all these cameras up? You know, it's kind of like, I think it's kind of like the concept isn't quite, it doesn't quite make sense. And even when we kind of get into our more, our second half of the movie, which is the more horror element to it, again, there's like reasons why are you filming, you know, why, we get a bit where they're running out in the woods and things, and it's like the cameras are like illuminating where they are. Why would you do that? And it's just kind of, why would you be filming things like this? So there's lots of elements here that I think you can have a certain degree of suspending disbelief when it comes to found footage about why people are filming. But I gotta say, I think this movie does cross the line where I think it's, I don't think it's quite believable in that respect. So it kind of deflates maybe some of the tension that it could have had, even though I do think it does a good job of having some horror elements that do work. Okay, so let's talk about our characters. This is going to be the other kind of the main issue. The acting is fine, and I'm willing. I haven't watched the other reviews, but I'm willing to bet that some people will say they don't like the acting. The acting is fine. The characters are written to be extremely unlikable. They are written to be bratty Gen Zers who are selfish, vapid, and kind of annoying. And they play that role well. But that's the characters, and these are the people who are primary protagonists, who we are meant to root for. We do get, say, this second bunch of people who are kind of, we don't get as much backstory with, but they're again, the acting is fine, but we don't get much characterization with those. But our two influencers, I mean, they try to go, oh yeah, we're going to rip them off, and then we're going to give this money to charity, and it's clearly a way to try and get the audience to empathise with them a bit more. But I got to say, I don't think it was enough. I thought these characters ended up being kind of quite brutally unlikable characters. There was some guy in the UK who did a very similar thing. He was committing sort of crimes and putting them on YouTube, and it all became popular. It was this big whole thing in the UK. And that's kind of what these people are like. So it's kind of like fairly hard to really root for them, because they do seem they're doing crimes at the end of the day. So you know, it's hard to kind of really feel too sympathetic for them, if we're being honest. So they're my critiques really, and I do think this movie, because of that, this movie is not quite as strong as like the Borderlands I've mentioned, but I do still think it's a very strong movie in some respects, because I do think it does have a good sense of horror, and I guess that's what you want to watch. I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 10. I was going maybe a 6, but I do think, even though I have some problems with this movie, I do think, generally speaking, I was quite engaged with this one. So I'm going to go for a 7. And yeah, so have you seen it? What are your thoughts? Please do let me know, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.